a big week for Mr. Carney, racking up more political points. What the heck's going on here? This prime minister's on a roll. To break it all down, we're joined by Speer, my co-founder and editor-at-large for this edition of the Roundtable. Hey, Sean.
Hey, Rudyard, great to connect. And let me just say on behalf of all of our listeners and viewers, how much we admire the Munk Debate this week and your willingness and the willingness on the part of the Munk family to stand up against a lot of forces trying to shut you down.
Hey, I appreciate it. We'll get into that in the back half of the show. The good, the bad, the ugly of this week's big Munk Debate in Toronto. Tons of protests. What happened? I'll give you the inside scoop. But let's talk about Mark Carney first, because we hypothesized, Sean, out of the pipeline MOU with Alberta that this prime minister had some serious mojo happening. You've been with our Hub Politics panel, our other great podcast that you can access on our YouTube channel or in our podcast feed. And it seems like David Coletto, our kind of de facto resident pollster, seems to support what our spidey sense was picking up last week, which is the moderate middle is a rich and fertile ground to find political support in. And boy, the prime minister is planting stakes, putting down signs, roping off territory, and seems to be capturing a lot of public support at the same time.
Yeah, as you say, Rudyard, in the immediate aftermath of the MOU announcement alongside Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, I think there was a sense that the politics for both the Prime Minister and the Premier were favorable, but then there were a couple of moments where that seemed less reliable. Stephen Guilbeault's resignation from the Carney cabinet, followed by the jeers that the Premier faced at the UCP annual general meeting. And one started to wonder, maybe we had misread things. Maybe this might be their undoing, that it exposed these weaknesses they both have on their respective left and right flanks. And so I've been really grateful for David Coletto's research from Abacus Data in recent days that shows that notwithstanding some grumblings on Carney's left and Smith's right, there is overwhelming support, Rudyard, for the MOU and its various component parts in the broad middle, as you put it. Not only is it supported in the majority nationally, what's really interesting is it has significant majority support in the province of Alberta, and perhaps most interesting, Rudyard, hugely popular amongst self-identified conservatives. As Coletto put it to me on this week's Hub Politics, he can't think of an instance where a Liberal Prime Minister has done something in the past decade or longer that finds even more support from conservatives than self-identified Liberals. We can talk a bit about what that means with respect to this particular issue or particular set of policies. But I think this is significant and worth talking about precisely because what it might tell us about our politics more broadly. Where are these other issues, Rudyard, where we've given way to loud, galvanized voices on the far left or the far right that has obscured the room for broad public support? I'm going to write, for instance, in this weekend's weekly wrap, that for all the talk, Rudyard, about healthcare reform being the so-called third rail of politics, I've been struck that as the Smith government in Alberta has tested that political axiom, there hasn't been much pushback. There hasn't been that much resistance. And it makes you wonder how much we've let our politics be captured by extremes or captured by these prevailing assumptions, and that they stand in the way of doing the kind of good government's sensible policy that can actually find support from a broad cross-section of Canadians.
Yeah, well said. And I think you're right. I think, there's always an assumption because we live these algorithmic lives where our news feeds are dominated by our own preferences, and our own preferences are fed back to us. And we assume that our own preferences are everybody else's preferences. And then the algorithm goes obviously that one step further because it wants to hold our attention on the screen. And it serves us up, maybe preferences that we weren't so sure we supported, but hey, that kind of gets my adrenaline going. That gets some dopamine firing, and before you know it, you're off in one of those extremes. You're supporting Western separatism, or you're climbing the CN Tower to stake out your bona fides as a green activist like Stephen Guilbeault once did. And I agree with you. There's something positive here. And whether Mr. Carney stumbled across this or whether this is part of a conscious strategy, we will see. But it suggests that polarization as this meta-thesis of all politics everywhere, all the time, may simply not apply to Canada. Yes, on certain, issues, you're going to have that. Gun control, reproductive rights. The Supreme Court increasingly seems controversial in Canada. But there is a yearning, I see, this week, in those numbers from David Coletto and elsewhere, that Canadians want to find some middle ground. Maybe we're all burned out, tired of the polarization, tired of the division, tired of the constant fighting and bickering. Sean, I'm almost sounding Pollyannish, but I don't know. Is this, as you say, a moment where something is revealed to us? And then the question is, does our political class build on this?
Yeah, I think there's something to that. Next year, Rudyard, I'm going to have the honor to deliver the first inaugural Harris Legacy Lecture, where I'll talk a bit about the policy record of Mike Harris and the common sense revolution. And I think it's another example, Rudyard, where there was a silent majority that was broadly in favor of the policy actions that the Harris government was taking, but that silent majority was not reflected in the journalism or the punditry or whatever, that we have succumbed in some ways to the largest, best organized, most galvanized voices, and yet regular people going about living their lives who aren't particularly ideological or particularly partisan want their politicians to be doing things that make sense. They want to be doing things that are pragmatic. They want them to be doing things that advance the country's interests and not are merely responsive to these fringe players. And so in that sense, I think it's to the credit of both Prime Minister Carney and Premier Smith that they made what amounted to a bet that even though they might face some grumblings from their respective base voters, that there existed this broad cross-section of Canadians who would support something like the MOU. And as I say, I think it's a kind of interesting way to think about our politics, and it makes you wonder how many other issues does it apply, where going over our loudest, most activist voices and speaking directly to the median voter is ultimately still the right political strategy. I'll come to you in 1 second, but if you'll permit me, let me put a somewhat provocative thesis on the table. You mentioned, I think rightly, the extent to which the algorithms can come to inflate particular points of view and cause them to be perceived as stronger and more prevalent in our society. I think an underestimated factor, Rudyard, is our parsimonious public political party financing regime. That if you think about it, political parties need to generate financing $1,500 at a time, and the way you do that is galvanize your most vociferous supporters by creating manufactured differentiation with your political opponents, by really seizing on issues that you know will galvanize and motivate people. And so people take for granted that our political financing regime is self-evidently good, that it's self-evidently better than quote-unquote big money in U.S. politics. But I think it's important to recognize that this all involves trade-offs. And I wonder if one of the trade-offs we've underestimated is the extent to which our political financing regime has contributed to this perception of artificial polarization, and in so doing, it obscured the extent to which actually there is a pretty broad middle in our politics.
Yeah. I would say America has, big money, and they also have a lot of polarization. Europe is interesting. I mean, they've gone a long way towards the public financing of political parties. But let's just, in this first half of the roundtable, move over to the other big personality in this drama, and that's Pierre Poilievre. And how do you think, Sean, he is looking at this MOU, the reaction to it, the fallout afterwards? I feel like it represents a bit of a challenge, in a sense, to his political brand. Again, an impressive one that he has built over years at the kind of front lines of a variety of conservative causes and ideas, and a brand whose image that he sharpened through his successful leadership to become the head of the Conservative Party of Canada, and then sharpened further at times during the election. But already we saw in the big campaign of last spring a kind of a softening to a certain degree of Pierre Poilievre. Does this suggest that he's got more work to do to kind of tack to a more of a, I don't know, centrist positioning? I know that often frustrates conservatives to hear that, because it feels like, they're being denied their principles, and they're being denied the license to communicate those core bedrock beliefs in the name of political expediency, which is that horrible thing called the mushy middle. So, I mean, what do you think? What do you think he does? Does this force more introspection, or I don't know? Is it all priced to perfection right now with Mark Carney and Danielle Smith? And there's a ton here that can go wrong with this MOU. There are lots of reasons, as we've discussed on other shows here in the Hub, why this pipeline may never get built. And it might be a mistake to read too much into the last 7 to 10 days, because this is the high water mark, and unfortunately it's downhill from here.
Yeah, I think that's true. But the extent to which this particular issue is reflective of a broader trend, I think it does represent a challenge for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. If you think about it, Rudyard, before Mark Carney came on the scene, the Conservatives had a clear differentiation with the Trudeau government on a set of issues that advantaged the Conservatives: housing, immigration, inflation, size of government, et cetera, et cetera. And in a way, what Carney has gone about systematically eliminating, or at least diminishing, those sources of differentiation. He's cut taxes. He's gotten rid of the carbon tax. He's abandoned the kind of performative foreign policy of the Trudeau government. He's now signed a deal with, I would argue, the kind of leading conservative political voice in the country, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, on a new pipeline. And so you get the sense, this has been a common theme, I think, of the roundtable really since earlier this year. You do get the sense, Rudyard, that Poilievre and the Conservatives are struggling to find their voice in this new political environment. What are the issues where they can have that differentiation with the Carney government that are both conservative, as you say, and advantageous to the party? And I think this MOU, not only is it itself challenging for all the reasons you described, the extent to which it is in keeping with a broader trend, it does represent a challenge and a threat to the Conservatives.
Yeah, well said. Well, we'll continue to watch this. Just as this week's political footnote has to be Rustad, the now outgoing head of the BC Conservatives, who's brandished, a lot of whiskey in your water type politics, and that ultimately is seeing him exit stage left. So whether this is a sign of changing times, we'll have to continue to follow that here on the roundtable. Sean, we're going to say goodbye to our complimentary listeners and viewers. We're going to join our Hub Heroes and Hub Fellows, our paid subscribers, next to give an inside peek of a big Munk debate that happened this week. I was at the center of it. Unfortunately, there were numerous arrests here in downtown Toronto of protesters bent on shutting down this debate. We're going to give you, our valued subscribers, an inside peek into how this thing happened, what went down, and the future of free speech in Toronto's largest city. Sign up to become a Hub subscriber at www.thehub.ca, and we'll send you a link immediately to listen to the back half of the roundtable. So bye-bye to our free listeners and viewers, and back with our subscribers in just a moment.